The morning mist clung to the fields like a shroud, concealing the fate that awaited thousands of men on that fateful day. Robert Grey tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the weight of destiny pressing upon him. The distant sound of marching feet grew louder, a harbinger of the bloodshed to come. Little did he know, this battle would etch his name into the annals of history and alter the course of the war. Robert adjusted his helmet, the metal cool against his brow, and glanced at the men around him. They were a motley crew, hardened by years of war, their faces grim and determined. The English army, led by Edward the Black Prince, had taken a defensive position near the town of Poitiers. Robert could see the French forces in the distance, a sea of gleaming armour and fluttering banners. "Steady, lads," Robert's captain called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "Today, we stand as one. Today, we fight for England." Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he thought of his family back home in Yorkshire. The farm, the fields, the faces of his loved ones flashed before his eyes. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. The French, under King John Roman II, were a formidable force, but Robert believed in the Black Prince's leadership and the strength of their cause. The French cavalry began their advance, a thunderous roar of hooves that shook the ground. The English longbowmen, positioned strategically on the hills, released a volley of arrows, darkening the sky. Robert watched as the arrows found their marks, horses and men falling in heaps. But the French pressed on, undeterred by the hail of death. "Here they come," someone shouted, and Robert braced himself as the enemy drew nearer. The clash of steel rang out as the French knights reached the English lines. Robert swung his sword, the blade meeting resistance as it struck a French soldier's shield. He pushed forward, his muscles straining, and delivered a powerful blow that sent the man sprawling. The battlefield was a chaotic frenzy of shouting, clashing weapons, and the cries of the wounded. Amidst the turmoil, Robert found himself face to face with a French knight, the man's eyes visible through the slits of his helmet. They circled each other, searching for an opening. The knight lunged, and Robert parried, their swords ringing out in a deadly dance. With a quick sidestep, Robert brought his blade down on the knight's shoulder, the force of the blow driving him to his knees. "To the prince," someone yelled, and Robert turned to see Edward the Black Prince in the thick of the fight, his banner held high. The sight filled Robert with renewed determination. He fought his way through the throng, desperate to reach his leader. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the English were gaining the upper hand. The French forces, despite their numbers, were faltering under the relentless assault. Robert could see pockets of resistance breaking apart, the French soldiers retreating or surrendering. In the midst of the chaos, a shout went up. "The king! We've captured the king!" Robert turned to see a group of English knights dragging a richly armoured figure towards the rear. It was King John Roman II of France, his royal crest unmistakable. The sight sent a ripple of triumph through the English ranks. With the capture of the French king, the tide of the battle turned decisively in favour of the English. The French forces began to scatter, their morale shattered. Robert felt a surge of relief and victory as the enemy fled the field. As the sun set on the blood-soaked plains of Poitiers, Robert Grey stood among his comrades, weary but elated. The Battle of Poitiers had been won, and with it, a significant blow had been dealt to the French. Robert knew that this victory would resonate far beyond the battlefield, shaping the future of the war and his own destiny. The aftermath of the battle was a mix of relief and exhaustion. Robert Grey sat on a fallen log, his sword resting on his knees, as he watched the English forces consolidate their victory. The air was thick with the acrid smell of sweat and blood, the cries of the wounded mingling with the cheers of the victors. The once green fields of Poitiers were now a sombre canvas of trampled earth and lifeless bodies. Robert's limbs ached from the strain of battle, but he couldn't suppress the sense of accomplishment that filled him. He had survived one of the most significant clashes of the 100 Years' War and played his part in a historic triumph. The capture of King John Roman II was a coup that would reverberate through the courts of Europe, a testament to the strategic brilliance of Edward the Black Prince and the tenacity of his men. "Robert!" a voice called out, snapping him from his reverie. It was William, a fellow soldier and close friend. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, but his eyes shone with excitement. "Can you believe it? We've done it. The French king is our prisoner." Robert managed a tired smile. "Aye, it's a day we'll not soon forget." William sat beside him, wincing as he removed his helmet. "The Black Prince himself has called for a council. He wants to thank us all personally." The prospect of meeting Edward the Black Prince filled Robert with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. He had seen the prince from a distance, a figure of regal authority and battlefield prowess, but to stand before him and receive his commendation was an honor beyond anything he had ever imagined. As the night fell, the English camp buzzed with a subdued energy of men too tired to celebrate, but too exhilarated to sleep. Fires dotted the landscape, their flickering light casting long shadows across the faces of the soldiers. Robert and William made their way to the central tent, where the prince awaited. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with reverence. Edward the Black Prince stood tall, his presence commanding the room. His dark armor gleamed in the firelight, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the faces of his men. "Brave soldiers of England," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and gratitude. "Today, you have shown the world what it means to fight for honor and country. The victory at Poitiers is not mine alone, but belongs to each one of you who stood your ground and faced the enemy without fear." A murmur of approval rippled through the tent. Robert felt a swell of pride as the prince's gaze fell upon him and his comrades. In particular, Edward continued, "I wish to commend those who played a crucial role in capturing King John. Your actions have not only secured our victory, but have also given us a powerful bargaining tool. This war is far from over, but today we have struck a blow that will echo through history." The prince's words were met with a roar of approval. Robert felt a hand clap his shoulder, and he turned to see William grinning broadly. The sense of camaraderie and shared achievement was palpable, a bond forged in the crucible of battle. After the council, Robert and William wandered back to their tent, the reality of the day's events slowly sinking in. They spoke in hushed tones, recounting their experiences, each moment of the battle etched vividly in their minds. "Do you think they'll remember us, Robert?" William asked, his voice tinged with awe. Robert smiled, the weariness lifting from his shoulders. "Aye, they will. History will remember this day, and the men who made it possible." As he lay down to rest, the sounds of the camp fading into the night, Robert's thoughts drifted to the future. The war was not over, but he knew that he had been part of something monumental. The victory at Poitiers had shifted the balance, and with King John Roman II as their prisoner, the English had gained a significant advantage. For now, though, Robert allowed himself the luxury of sleep, the weight of his sword and the memories of the day resting beside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was content in the knowledge that he had fought bravely and contributed to a victory that would shape the course of history. Dawn broke over the English camp, casting a pale light on the aftermath of the previous day's battle. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the lingering stench of war. Robert Gray awoke to the sounds of men stirring, their movements slow and deliberate as they tended to the wounded and gathered the spoils of their hard-fought victory. Robert stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. Despite the weariness that clung to him, there was a renewed sense of purpose. The triumph at Poitiers had not only boosted their morale, but also solidified their position in the conflict. He found William already up, helping to distribute rations. The two friends exchanged a nod, the unspoken bond of shared experience stronger than ever. As Robert joined the line, he overheard snippets of conversation. The capture of King John Roman II was the primary topic, with everyone speculating on what this would mean for the war and for England's future. After a quick breakfast, Robert and William were summoned to a debriefing. They gathered with other key soldiers in a large tent where the Black Prince and his advisors were already in deep discussion. The prince looked up as they entered, his expression a mix of determination and satisfaction. "Men," Edward began, his voice steady and commanding. "Our victory here has given us a significant upper hand. King John is our prisoner, and with him, we hold a powerful bargaining chip. But we must remain vigilant. The French will not take this defeat lightly. The advisors nodded in agreement, their faces somber. One of them, a seasoned knight named Sir Richard, stepped forward. "Our scouts report that the French forces are in disarray, but we must anticipate a counterattack. They will want to rescue their king and regain their honor." Robert listened intently, absorbing every detail. The reality of their situation was clear. While the victory at Poitiers was a major achievement, the war was far from over. "We will march towards Bordeaux," Edward continued, "where we can regroup and fortify our position. From there, we will negotiate terms with the French. In the meantime, we must ensure the safe transport of King John and manage our captured prisoners." As the meeting adjourned, Robert felt a sense of resolve settle over him. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face whatever came next. The Black Prince's leadership was inspiring, and Robert was proud to serve under such a capable and visionary commander. The march to Bordeaux began the following day. The English army moved with a disciplined efficiency, their spirits buoyed by the recent victory. Robert walked alongside William, their conversations ranging from tactical discussions to lighter topics that helped pass the time. The camaraderie among the soldiers was palpable, a brotherhood forged in the fires of battle. As they travelled, Robert took the opportunity to observe the landscape. The rolling hills and lush fields of France were a stark contrast to the turmoil of war. He thought of his family back in Yorkshire, wondering how they fared and hoping that one day he would return to them, not just as a soldier, but as a hero. The journey to Bordeaux was not without its challenges. They encountered pockets of resistance, small groups of French soldiers who had either not heard of the defeat at Poitiers or were too proud to surrender. Each skirmish was a reminder of the ongoing struggle, but the English forces remained resolute. Upon reaching Bordeaux, the army was greeted with cheers from the townspeople. The news of their victory had spread, and the sight of King John Roman II in chains was a powerful symbol of their triumph. The Black Prince wasted no time in fortifying their position, setting up defences and preparing for the next phase of their campaign. Robert found himself assigned to the guard detail for King John, a task that was both an honour and a responsibility. The French king, though a prisoner, was treated with the respect due to his rank. Robert observed him closely, noting the dignity with which the king bore his captivity. One evening, as Robert stood watch outside the king's quarters, he was approached by a noble-looking Frenchman. The man introduced himself as Philippe, a member of King John's retinue who had chosen to remain with his liege rather than flee. "You fought bravely at Poitiers," Philippe said, his tone respectful. "I have seen many battles, and I can tell you that your victory was no small feat." Robert nodded, appreciating the recognition from an enemy soldier. "We did what we had to," he replied, "but I know this war is far from over." Philippe sighed, his expression somber. "Indeed, France will not rest until our king is free. But perhaps, in time, we can find a way to end this conflict with honour on both sides." As Philippe walked away, Robert pondered his words. The hope for a peaceful resolution seemed distant, but it was a goal worth striving for. Until then, he would continue to fight for his country and follow the Black Prince, whose vision and leadership had brought them this far. The days in Bordeaux turned into weeks as negotiations began. The English fortified their positions and prepared for any attempts by the French to rescue their king. Robert's duties kept him busy, but he made time to train and stay sharp, knowing that complacency could be deadly. One morning, as the sun rose over the fortified city, Robert received word that a delegation from the French court had arrived. The negotiations were about to take a significant turn, and the outcome could change the course of the war. Standing on the battlements, Robert looked out at the horizon, the weight of history pressing upon him. The Battle of Poitiers had been a pivotal moment, but the path to peace and victory was still long and uncertain. Yet, with the Black Prince leading them, Robert felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. The arrival of the French delegation brought a palpable tension to Bordeaux. As representatives from both sides met in the Grand Hall, the air was thick with anticipation. Robert, stationed near the entrance with William, watched the proceedings with keen interest. This was a momentous occasion, a chance for diplomacy to shape the course of the war that had claimed so many lives. The French delegation, led by Charles, Duke of Normandy and son of King John Roman II, entered with an air of gravitas. Their expressions were a mix of pride and weariness, the weight of their king's capture evident in their bearing. On the English side, Edward the Black Prince stood tall and composed, flanked by his most trusted advisors. The initial exchanges were formal, each side presenting their positions and demands. The English sought substantial territorial gains and a hefty ransom for the release of King John, while the French aimed to negotiate terms that would preserve their dignity and minimize losses. The discussions were intense, with both sides striving to gain the upper hand. Robert and William listened intently, catching snippets of the negotiations. It was clear that both sides were determined, but the English had a significant advantage with the king as their prisoner. Days turned into weeks as the negotiations dragged on. The tension in the city grew, and the soldiers maintained a constant state of readiness. Robert's duties alternated between guarding King John and patrolling the city walls. He found himself reflecting on the nature of war and the possibility of peace. Despite the bloodshed and loss, there was a glimmer of hope that the conflict could end through diplomacy. One evening, as Robert was on guard duty near the king's quarters, he was approached again by Philippe. The French nobleman's face was etched with concern, and he seemed eager to speak. "Robert," Philippe began, his voice low and urgent, "I have heard rumors that some among the French forces are planning a rescue attempt. They believe that the negotiations are stalling and that a bold move might turn the tide." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Are you certain of this?" Philippe nodded. "I am. There are those who would rather risk everything than see our king remain a prisoner. I thought it only right to warn you. I have come to respect you and your comrades, and I do not wish to see more bloodshed." Robert thanked Philippe for the warning and immediately sought out his superiors to relay the information. The news prompted a swift response from the Black Prince, who increased security around the city and the king's quarters. Every precaution was taken to prevent an assault, and the tension within the walls of Bordeaux became even more palpable. As the days passed, the expected rescue attempt did not materialize. Whether the increased security deterred the French or the rumors were unfounded, Robert couldn't be sure. But the heightened alertness served as a reminder of the ever-present danger. Finally, after weeks of grueling negotiations, a breakthrough was announced. Both sides had reached an agreement. The terms were arduous for the French, but not without some concessions. King John Roman II would be ransomed for a vast sum of money, and several key territories would be ceded to the English. In return, the English agreed to a temporary cessation of hostilities, providing a fragile but hopeful respite from the war. The announcement was met with mixed emotions. Relief at the prospect of peace was tempered by the knowledge of the heavy price paid by both sides. The war was not over, but this agreement marked a significant step towards its resolution. The day of King John's release was marked by a somber ceremony. The French king, though still regal in his demeanor, bore the signs of his captivity. As he prepared to depart, he addressed the English soldiers who had guarded him. "You have treated me with honor," King John said, his voice carrying the weight of his ordeal. "May this accord bring peace to our lands and an end to the suffering of our people." Robert watched as the king was escorted to the French delegation. The moment was bittersweet, a symbol of both the horrors of war and the potential for reconciliation. With the French delegation gone and the immediate threat of conflict reduced, the English army began preparations to return home. The journey back was long, but the mood was lighter, buoyed by the hope of a lasting peace. Robert and William walked together, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken and the battles they had fought. "You think this peace will hold?" William asked, his tone thoughtful. Robert shrugged. "I hope so. We've seen enough bloodshed to last a lifetime. But if it doesn't, we'll be ready. We've proven that we can stand against any foe." As they neared the coast, the sight of English ships waiting to take them home filled Robert's heart with a sense of longing. The war had changed him, forged him into a soldier and a leader, but it had also strengthened his resolve to fight for a better future. The return to England was met with celebration. The news of their victory at Poitiers and the subsequent agreement spread quickly, and the soldiers were hailed as heroes. Robert found himself reunited with his family, their faces filled with pride and relief. The farm, the fields, and the familiar landscape of Yorkshire felt like a sanctuary after the trials of war. In the years that followed, the 100 Years' War continued in fits and starts, but the Battle of Poitiers remained a defining moment. Robert Grey's name, along with those of his comrades, became part of the legacy of that pivotal day. He continued to serve, always ready to defend his homeland, but he also cherished the peace that they had fought so hard to achieve. As he stood on the hill overlooking his home, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The battles, the victories, and the losses had shaped him, but it was the hope for a better future that drove him forward. The war might not be over, but for now there was peace, and that was worth fighting for.